Hello, everyone. You're from YouTube, and if anybody wants to discuss in the chat, we are discussing about the Herbie the Love Bug tonight. And I just got done watching the movie 10 minutes ago. So just what are your thoughts on the movie? And check and see if you want to come in anytime. If you know this movie, please feel free to put your questions in the chat. I want to begin with the opening credits. We got the opening credits and we got the Demolition Derby in Demolition Derby. And it started off with the Demolition Derby in the beginning of the film. And now in the beginning of the film, all the cars go crazy and crashing, and who's in one of them, of course, Dean Jones. Now, Dean Jones, of course, he passed away in 2015, but we're not here to discuss that right now. So if you are a channel member or if anybody wants to chime in, please feel free to be in the chat room. Or if you want, we can just do this discussion again on an earlier time if you feel free. So again, we are just in the beginning of the film. Of course, Jim Douglas didn't have Herbie at the time. Herbie comes a little bit later, and he's in this guy. He says something about again about discussing about money affairs. He goes, "No, Jim, it's not okay," and then it goes on and so forth. So that is what. So what that's what being said, and stuff like that. So I'm gonna say hey in the chat, and then maybe the rest of you can just follow that. So again, if anybody has questions, please feel free in the chat. And then we all met up with Buddy Hackett. By the way, he's working on the car. He's a mechanic. He started out as a mechanic in the and Herbie the Love Bug, and also in the Gang Half. And so he ended up, he said, and then when he wanted to go look for another car, he goes, "Where's the beast?" And he said, "You didn't cut out the axle." You can just tell by Buddy Hackett. He makes a weird face, and then he said, "Come out to me all of a sudden." And that's when things get a little bit, Jim Douglas had a bandage on his cheek, and then when he passes by this car shop, we all know the cars back in the old 60s and back in the 60s and 70s, and I know late 80s, the models are a lot different. But when he comes to this car lot in the movie, now I'm not really talking about the remake version of the Love Bug. I'm talking about the 69 version, just the 69 version. I know they did a remake, but we're not talking about the remake. We'll get onto that when by the time I get done here. And then all of a sudden he thought he was seeing things, and he accidentally bumped his head against the window, and then and then all of a sudden Carol comes around, and she says, who's played by Michelle Lee, by the way. Excuse me, Michelle Lee, of course, I don't know if she's still alive or passed away, but we're not going to discuss it. But Michelle Lee said something about if he has noggin, if he's in pain or anything, and he just says, "No, there was a slight in my head." So, and she said, "You better sit down." During that time, he was looking at that yellow and black vehicle. I don't know the model of make, but if you know the model of make of that car in that movie, let me know in the chat. Or this about anything else. So, and then he spies on it, and then that's when Thorndike comes in, which is by David Thomason, I think. He comes in. I know he's been in two other Disney films after that one, or one before that. So let me know in the chat how many films has David Thomason's been in. I think the first two he was in before The Love Bug. It was Mary Poppins, and I think a little bit later on, I think right after The Love Bug, he was also in Dead Nuns and Bruises with Angela Lansbury. May she rest in peace. So we're not here to discuss about that movie. We'll discuss about that. After I get done with the Herbie series. So Thorndike, of course, and he offers a refreshment to Jim Douglas, and Jim Douglas says something about cheap, honesty transportation, and then Thorndike was offended by it, so he just bid him good day, and that's when That's when Herbie did come in the early on in the film, and he didn't get the name at the time. He just showed up, bumped um, Jim Douglas's ankle there, and he said, "Where did this come from?" And then he hollered for one of his employees, and then one of the employees come out. But Carol backed him up and said something about another person, a former person that was supposed to be in the vehicle and didn't bother being in the vehicle. And so Carol did explain, and of course, so Jim Douglas have to leave, and he went back home. But the funny thing about that scene when he's on the way home going towards, those trains in San Francisco, they're called trolleys, and you can tell Herbie, of course, did follow him all the way home, but the police came around, and that's when he said, "I would advise you get a good lawyer." And Tennessee Summons called him, "Hey, he's a cute little fella." Now I know everybody knew about this whole entire movie. Wait, this is the way I like about the originals. It's way Tennessee, that describes the love the little car. Now I can just so if anybody can relate to that, please feel free in chat and stuff like that. So, of course, Tennessee at the time, well, also been played by Buddy Hackett. May he rest in peace. So, but Buddy Hackett plays Tennessee Steinmetz, and also, and I'm going to discuss the sequel later on. If you go mention about the sequel, that's going to be on a later time. So, anything, and Wade Tennessee Steinmetz, he was getting ready for the day. And then when they go back to Thorndyke's car shop, and Jim Douglas lost his temper. The detective saying, "I think Thorndyke is being," and then all of a sudden Thorndyke lost his temper, and then the detective had a little bit of a pointer. He said, "I think Thorndyke's being fair." He said, "It's not fair." And then all of a sudden he had to go sign papers with Carol, and then before I lose my temper, and then when Thorndyke trying to walk away, of course, Herbie did his usual. When a dog pees on anything in sight? Well, that's what little Herbie did with the oil. He decided to squirt his oil all over his shoe. And I know it's a sense of humor. That can be like a sense of humor statement. And he when Herbie did that, you know how little kids are afraid to cross the road and stuff. Well, when Jim Douglas was driving Herbie back home, it seems to get a little sketchy with highway and everything. Cause you know how little kids and pet and house pets are scared. They like come near a person. Well, Herbie gets that nervous. He rattles, he shakes, he goes and hides. He hasn't been around real cars. Of course, when a pet comes home, kids get excited, and the pet just gets a little shaky. Well, that's how Herbie was. Herbie was like acting like a little kid that that doesn't know nothing about a highway. He doesn't know about nothing about a highway. He just he just he's afraid of 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 all those cars are going faster than he is. And of course, you know, I know how about if you've seen the movie Cars, they have voices. Herbie has no voice. Herbie has no voice. He has a mind. He has a mind, and he's a machine. You know, but Herbie acts just like a little kid in that one scene where all the cars are moving right around him. He's nervous. He's a nervous wreck. And then they go back to Thorndyke. They go, and then you see Thorndyke's Rolls Royce right in front. Yeah, I don't know if those cars really still exist anymore. Those Rolls Royces cars, but Rolls Royce is kind of like a limousine nowadays. But Herbie bounced off from there, and then Thorndyke said, "Have you gone mad?" And he goes, "Okay, what's the joke?" So you hear that? We all hear about that statement all the time. And all of a sudden, Carol will show Douglas about the car. Herbie's like, "Well, calm." with her in the car, with the lady in the car is calm. Now you guys are going to laugh about this one. It was really Herbie, not so nervous, but when they come to, when Carol and Jim Douglas are in the car, and Carol and Jim Douglas are in the car, and they had a lot to do with the car. Now the car the car was calm, and also when they go to a straight light, and you can tell back in those days, during that time period, where different bugs have different cars like this, and the language, and he said, "I'll give that little bug a workout. I'll go easy on ya." And then Jim Douglas said, "Be serious, will ya?" And that's how I think it was during Janice's time. They had the female rock star who passed away young, and you can when they went and then they drove like all night, and Herbie stopped at this restaurant. You can hear the lady saying, "Hey, we don't have all night," and Carol said, "Goodbye, Mr. Douglas," and then she tried to get out, and then if you remember this, Dean Jones did play the hippie, and the hippie, and I don't know who was the other guy that was sitting by. It really is Dean Jones in that getup, with all that getup. He played the hippie, and she said she's a prisoner and she can't get out. We're all prisoners, Chicky baby. That's the language everybody probably heard about it back during that time period of the late 60s and early 70s. So yeah, that's probably part of Woodstock too. If you knew what Woodstock is, look it up on Google. But so yeah, you can tell Dean Jones did play another character besides Jim Douglas. He did play the hippie and stuff like that, and you hear the hippie saying, "Quite a weirdo's quite a he," and without the get up, and then go back to Jim Douglas on the other side of the car. She was trying to escape, and then all of a sudden they went to this, and all of a sudden this waitress suggested they go to this park, and so Jim Douglas really, then they went to this park, and a policeman, and then they all of a sudden how ladies back in those periods didn't want to get their hands dirty. Well, that's kind of like what it is today that's kind of like what it is today. So they went to this park, and all of a sudden she got all mad. Carol got all mad with Jim Douglas, and all of a sudden this police guy came along, and they stopped and something about the car, and Herbie wanted. Well, I think the policeman must have been, not all there and probably seeing things. But if you want to talk about that sequel, we'll talk about the sequel in next time. But I want to discuss the Love Bug. And, the Love Bug, of course, had a lot to do with, but when Jim Douglas took Herbie home, Tennessee Stipmas was like, couldn't believe his eyes, his eyeballs. And then Jim Douglas is making a few adjustments in the car, fixing it all up. And then they finally went. During the next day, and so Herbie Tennessee comes out, and all these dogs. He's playing the dogs. He said, "Don't fool around, will you? Play it straight. Don't give him any trouble. You're gonna make a good home here." And then Jim Douglas said, "It was all the ruckus." He goes, "Nothing." And then the theme song comes on. Now we all know the theme song comes on. It's got a good solid beat to it, and it's got a good solid beat. So if you want me to do this live stream again, we'll just do this from Streamline, and we'll start inviting people. But anyway, a lot of things went right exactly what that Jim Douglas is doing. And then that's how Tennessee said Herbie's all right. He goes with Herbie, named after a relative that Tennessee Stipmas was really saying. Now, again, during that whole entire movie, Herbie with, about that. And during the time, so it's what it was with, with Tennessee Steinmetz, and then then all of a sudden hit the by Flowers. And you see they were on their way back to the Thorndike shop. And all of a sudden you see Thorndike was trying to clock into Carol. And then all of a sudden he had to go right back into the shop and hide. While Jim Douglas surprised Carol with the flowers, I think it was meant for a thank you or such. And then all of a sudden you see Carol smiling there, and then Tennessee Steinmetz says, "Are you gonna race?" And Jim Douglas said, "What do you think?" And then that's when Buddy Hackett's eyes lit up like a saucer. And and then the following scene, yep, Herbie is back. Herbie's like racing, and then like you see in I don't know where they are at in California, but this looks like it's all took place in California, San Francisco type. And then you know excuse me.